In 1920, the war was officially over, but for millions of men and women across Europe, the battle had never truly ended. The cannons were silent, the trenches were empty, yet the world was still bleeding. 2 years had passed since the armistice of November 11, 1918. The treaties were signed, flags were raised, and politicians spoke of peace. But peace, for those who had survived the Great War, was a fragile and unfamiliar thing. Across France and Belgium, the land itself bore the scars of World War I. Fields once green were now wastelands of rusted wire, shattered trees, and unexploded shells. Farmers walked carefully, knowing that one wrong step could still mean death. Entire villages had vanished from maps, never to be rebuilt. For the soldiers who returned home, 1920 was not a victory year, it was a year of ghosts. Men came home missing arms, legs, eyes. Others returned physically whole but mentally shattered. The world had no word yet for PTSD. They called it shell shock, and many believed it was weakness. Former soldiers woke screaming in the night, reliving artillery barrages and gas attacks. Loud noises sent them diving for cover. Families watched their sons and husbands stare into nothing, trapped between past and present. Jobs were scarce. Factories had closed. Governments praised veterans but offered little help. Many soldiers felt abandoned by the same nations that had once sent them to die. In Britain alone, nearly 1 million men had been killed during the war. In 1920, their absence was everywhere in empty chairs, unopened letters, and names carved into stone memorials. For women, the war's end brought a different kind of suffering. Millions of widows struggled to survive on small pensions. Mothers waited years for sons who would never return, clinging to hope even when hope was cruel. Entire generations of young men were gone, leaving what writers would later call the lost generation. In 1920, memorials rose across Europe. Stone crosses and bronze statues became silent witnesses to unimaginable loss. Every village had a list of names, sometimes longer than the list of the living. Church bells rang not for celebration, but remembrance. Nowhere was the aftermath more bitter than in Germany. The Treaty of Versailles had been signed in 1919, and by 1920 its consequences were crushing the nation. Germany lost territory, military power, and was forced to pay massive reparations. Inflation began to spiral. Hunger spread. Many Germans felt humiliated, betrayed, and angry. Former soldiers returned not to gratitude, but to poverty and chaos. Street violence became common. Political extremism grew in the shadows. The seeds of another conflict were quietly being planted. Across Europe, countries struggled to rebuild. Railways were destroyed, cities lay in ruins, governments were in debt. The Spanish flu pandemic had just killed millions more, compounding the trauma of war. Yet, in 1920, there were small signs of hope. Children were born who had never heard a gunshot. Trees were planted where trenches once ran. Veterans formed brotherhoods, trying to understand what they had survived together. Writers, poets, and artists began to tell the truth about the war, not the glory, but the horror. Books and poems described mud, fear, and death, challenging the old idea that war was noble. The world was learning slowly and painfully. World War I officially ended in 1918, but in 1920, its shadow stretched long and dark. It lived in the trembling hands of a former soldier, in the silence of a mother's empty home, in the anger of nations struggling to forgive or forget. The Great War changed everything: borders, societies, and the human soul itself. And though the guns had stopped firing, the echoes of the trenches still haunted the world. In 1920, humanity stood at a crossroads, wounded, wiser, and uncertain. The war was over, but its legacy had only just begun.